Should we start, Rahul sir?
Wait.
Okay. Hello and welcome. I, Dr. Sachin Gadekar, an office bearer, ELT chapter Pune, welcome you all to this fourth free webinar on the teaching of English, jointly organized by ELT chapter Pune, ELT chapter Visakhapatnam, and powered by Tolani Maritime Institute, Pune. At the outset, let me put forth some interesting and encouraging statistics of registrations received for this particular webinar. Friends, we have got 908 registrations for this webinar. I'm happy to inform you that we have representatives from 22 states, 1 UT, 4 from Nepal, 1 from Pakistan, 1 from Iran, 1 from UAE, 1 from Oman, and 2 from Saudi Arabia. Truly international webinar. This is really amazing and encouraging for all the organizing committee members. To start off, I would like to invite Dr. Zadan Patil, President ELT Chapter Pune, to brief us on various activities and initiatives taken up by ELT Chapter Pune. Dr. Zadan Patil, over to you, sir, please.
Thank you, Sachin. A very good morning to you, friends. It's indeed a matter of pleasure and pride and privilege for me to be with you this morning. And we'll be together for about 90 minutes or so. And 3 of us will be speaking on 3 different topics. So, let me give you some pieces of information as far as the Pune chapter of English Language Teachers Association of India is concerned. We were born about a year and a half ago. And when we started this chapter, we were a small number, but after about 18 months or so, we are now nearly 200 members, if I'm not mistaken. Rahul may correct me if I'm wrong. So over the last 18 months or so, we've conducted several workshops, and the workshops were conducted not only for teachers, but also for learners. And these learners came from different levels. We went to some villages, some rural areas, and we conducted workshops, little workshops, activity-based workshops for children, underprivileged children studying in regional language medium schools and so on and so forth. Our focus is not on the training of teachers who teach at English medium schools or convent schools. Our focus is on organizing workshops for those teachers and for those learners who are not so privileged and who study and teach in villages, in remote areas, in mountainous areas, and so on and so forth. We have also conducted several workshops in collaboration with other chapters. Like recently, we had a joint webinar, which was organized jointly by Pune chapter and Shimla chapter, right? So, and we want to organize so many more workshops. We want to reach the unreached, and we have also started working on bringing out a volume of Indian English, comprising mainly Indian English grammar and Indian English vocabulary. So we're working in that particular direction. Let's hope we'll be able to complete these 2 little projects as soon as possible. Thank you very much. Back to you, Sachin.
Thank you, sir. ELT Pune chapter is blessed to work, under your flagship. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Now, secondly, I would like to call upon Dr. Raghavendra Reddy, President ELT chapter Visakhapatnam, to brief us on the activities conducted by the chapter Visakhapatnam. Sir, over to you, please.
Thank you, Dr. Sachin. One of the towering personalities in the realm of ELT, Professor Zadan Patil, Principal TM Institute, Captain Krishnamurti Iyer, exceptional speakers of English, Dr. Swati, Paul Armstrong, office bearers of Pune and ELT chapters, and my dear participants, a very good morning to all. ELT Visakhapatnam chapter was started in 2018. It's 2 years old. And now we have 80 members. We are growing slowly and steadily. I'm very certain to say that by the end of next month, the number will reach 100. During this pandemic period, we have organized 3 webinars. I'm very happy to say that for our last webinar, we had 1,000 participants, 1,900 participants registered, but 1,000 participants attended. Coincidentally, this is the 4th webinar for both Pune and Altai chapters. We'll continue organizing programs for the professional growth of teachers of English in India. Altai Vishakhapatnam chapter is planning to start a blog for its members to publish poems, short stories, original pieces of writing. Probably it will be in the next month. We are receiving proposals for collaboration. So we have decided to move positively. We all know when two mighty armies clash, it is war what happens. When two mighty Altai chapters collaborate, it is webinar what takes place. War is destructive, webinar is productive. I sincerely thank Professor Jaden Patil and his potent team for the collaboration and cooperation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. We really look forward to having many more webinars jointly organized by both the chapters. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Dear all, we were able to accommodate 500 plus participants using this particular platform for this webinar because of Tolani Maritime Institute Pune and their support. So we have with us the principal of the institute. I humbly request and invite Captain Krishnamurthy Iyer sir, the principal of Tolani Maritime Institute Pune, for welcome address. Sir, please. Sir, I would request you to unmute yourself first.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Sachin. The members of ELT Pune chapter and Vishakhapatnam chapter, dignitaries who are the panelists and participants, a very good morning to all of you. On behalf of Tolani Maritime Institute, Pune, I extend a warm welcome to all the participants on this online webinar on the teaching of English organized by ELT Pune chapter and ELT Vishakhapatnam chapter. Tolani Maritime Institute is pleased to be associated with this initiative taken by ELT, as we understand the importance of English not only in maritime industry, but also in all walks of life. In maritime industry, English is considered as a primary tool for communication at sea and in port, as seafarers deal with different nationalities. English in shipping industry is known as maritime English, as the correct phrase has to be used in communication to avoid any misinterpretation. International Maritime Organization has developed standard maritime phrases to be used for shipboard and ship-to-shore communication. It has been very challenging for maritime institutes to develop mariners of high standard of competence and professionalism with excellent English communication skills, as students have been coming from different backgrounds of English language. The teachers, trainers, and students need to make collaborative efforts in order to meet the international standards of English, and they can perform effectively in their profession as well as their personal life. I firmly believe that such endeavors in improving English language skills by ELT will help our teachers, trainers, cadets in uplifting their knowledge and language skills. I'm sure we will all have a lot to take home from this webinar, and I wish the webinar a great success. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your kind words. And I must say, ELT chapter Pune and ELT chapter Vishakhapatnam are very happy to collaborate with such eminent institute. Thank you so much. Moving on, it's time to introduce today's moderator to you all. I take this opportunity to introduce the moderator for this webinar, Dr. Siva Satyanarayan. Dr. Siva Satyanarayana, the Secretary of ELT Chapter, Visakhapatnam, is presently working as an Assistant Professor of English in Geetham deemed to be university. He has 14 years of experience in teaching English language, communication skills, and soft skills to undergraduate and postgraduate students. He's received his doctoral degree in linguistics from Andhra University. He has published a good number of research articles in referred journals. He is a certified master trainer from British Council of India. He is the certified national trainer from Junior Chamber International and served as a resource person and trainer for various personality development training programs. He served as the president, Junior Chamber International Voltaire chapter in the year 2018, state coordinator for skill development in the year 2019. He has conducted the prestigious National Train the Trainer seminar in Visakhapatnam in his tenure as the president and initiated many social welfare and individual development activities. I welcome Dr. Siva here. Before I hand over session to the moderator, have a few instructions for all participants from the organizing committee. Dear participants, feedback link will be shared during the question and answer session. When you fill in the details, which will be later used for your certificates, please keep in mind, please ensure that you fill in the correct salutation, correct email ID, full name, and please do not use all caps option for filling in data. The Zoom platform here would accommodate 500 participants, and rest of them out of 908 would be joining us on Facebook live page. Now, with all this, I thank everyone being here with us, and I hand over the session to Dr. Siva. Sir, over to you.
Good morning, all. Thank you, Dr. Sachin, for introducing me to the participants and the panel members. Well, it's time for us to start the sessions. Let us start the webinar with the first talk by Dr. Swati Chikala. Dr. Swati Chikala is working as an assistant professor of English at Geetham DBTB University, Visakhapatnam. She is Vice President, ELT Visakhapatnam chapter. She received her doctoral degree from Andhra University, MPhil and MA from Stella Maris College, Chennai. She has 13 years of experience in teaching and research and is currently guiding PhD scholars. She has to her credit a good number of research articles published in refereed journals. She co-authored 3 books pertaining to the fields of English literature and English language teaching. She was awarded the coveted English Language Teachers Research Partnership Award by the British Council of India in 2015. As a convener, she organized a number of workshops and webinars. As a resource person, she has been invited on several occasions by Andhra Pradesh Human Resource Development to train state government recruits on English language, communication skills, and soft skills. She is a member of editorial board of internationally reputed journals. With this brief introduction of Dr. Swati Chikala, I'm happy to invite Dr. Swati Chikala to deliver her lecture. Over to Swati Chikala.
Thank you, Dr. Shiva. Am I audible to all?
Yes.
A very good morning to everybody. I thank the organizers, ELT Visakhapatnam and Pune chapters, and Tolani Maritime Institute, Pune, for giving me this opportunity. And I extend a warm welcome to all the participants. I'm happy to share this platform with Professor Z.N. Patil sir and Mr. Paul Armstrong. It truly is a privilege. Thank you. To begin with, today my topic of presentation is rubrics. So let's straight away plunge into this discussion of rubrics. Is my screen visible?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, it is. It is.
Yes. All right, so let's proceed with this. Before I actually begin, I would like to quote David S. Reinhold, who said about rubrics. Rubrics, the good, the great, and the awesome. I would actually go with the description given by David, because rubrics are really good, great, and awesome tools for assessment. And I'd like to bring to the notice of the participants that I would be focusing on the assessment aspect of the rubrics. Since rubrics is a versatile field and tool, I would clearly restrict it to the assessment aspect only as a scoring or a grading tool. So let's quickly run through the presentation overview. We have the definition of rubric and then the types, importance. However, my focus for this webinar would be tips for developing rubrics. So this is where I would be sparing much time. A quick look at the terms which would set the context for our topic. The word is assessment, the other one is evaluation. When I use the word assessment in the title for this webinar, I meant any scoring or grading perspective. However, when we come to these terms individually, in contrast to the word evaluation, we see that they both are a little different. I'm sure you all agree with me that they're similar, yet there is a lot of difference. Let's take a look at the points that I've mentioned here. Can we run the first poll, please? I request the audience to answer this poll. Choose an option that think is appropriate with regard to the terms assessment and evaluation. Great, I see a lot of fun and it's pretty impressive. Yes. Majority has selected option 2. Assessment is process oriented and evaluation is product oriented, which is absolutely correct. So first and the third options are not really appropriate because assessment is not judgmental, but it's diagnostic, and it is formative, but it's not summative. So answer 2 is appropriate for description. All right, so we have to move on from the terms individually and combine them both and see the common points here. Though there are differences given on the outer circles, I would like to bring your focus to this collaborative aspect of assessment and evaluation. The common points are they require criteria. This is one aspect which is relevant to rubrics, and they use measures and are evidence driven. So based on this, I would move on to the next aspect of our presentation, which is rubrics. All right, so what is a rubric? As we know, it's a grading tool or a scoring tool, and usually it's in the form of a matrix or a grid or a table wherein you score the performance levels of the students against the criteria that we mentioned. So this we have, it helps us to interpret and grade the skills or the work or performance levels of the students. And the other names for rubrics is criteria sheets, grading schemes, scoring guides. There are a few more names, but these are prevalent. I just wanted to ask the participants to answer this. How many of us and how use assessment rubrics often? So let's go with the second poll. Rahul sir, maybe we can just shoot the second poll, please. Yes, thank you. This is only just for an understanding that we use rubrics, not very often maybe, but I know that most of the English lab teachers use rubrics. And similarly, this applies to different subjects. However, since we have participants ranging from different fields of study, I was just wondering, just out of curiosity, I would like to know how many of us actually use rubrics. Wonderful. So we have the first and the second, which are mostly voted. Yeah, let's end the poll, sir. No problem. Sometimes. Great. Very good. So we have almost always and sometimes, and I'm sure the first one is majorly the fields which have lab components as the assessment subject. And sometimes I'm sure these are the other fields of study which are using the rubrics, which is wonderful. So moving on to the next aspect of the presentation, why use rubrics? That's a big question here. Again, it's a grading scoring rubric. So for teachers, it becomes a tool to assess students and to define clear goals and create some fairness while we are assessing the performance of the students. That is really important to justify or to provide a closure to this in a neat and clear way. For learners, this becomes a way to understand what is expected of them in the course, throughout the course, and also at the end of the course. So this has to match with the learning outcomes, and this would really help them to do well. Next, we also say that rubrics can also be used not just by the teachers, but by learners as well, in the forms of peer assessments and self-assessment. This is a wonderful way to make them interactive. There are two major types of rubrics. One is holistic rubric, the other one is analytic rubric. Holistic rubric, we'll quickly run through this because it's not a really important part to focus on. So this rubric is used without any criteria specifically mentioned. It assesses the performance as a whole. It is a quick and overall judgment on the performance. And there is no specific or individual feedback related to criteria. So that's because there is no weight criteria mentioned in holistic rubric. I'll quickly show a sample to you here. This is the sample that I would like to show to you. The first row we have exceeds criteria, meets criteria, progressing to criteria, and below expectations. And these are scored as 4, 3, 2, 1. And the below descriptors in the columns are the criteria descriptors. If you observe, there is no specific criteria given here. These are just a few pointers to define the performance of the students. This is used, and this is actually easier to score the students. Next type is analytic rubrics or analytical rubrics. What they do is they give us more clearer perspective, clearer criteria to assess the student's performance. They give useful feedback, which is individualized, and it has different specific weight criteria. However, there is more time needed to create and assess because this takes a lot of effort from the teacher's side. This is a simple framework for analytic rubric, wherein you see the vertical axis has the criteria stated here: use of visual aids, performance, and knowledge. And on the horizontal axis, we have the level of performance or the standards. We can also give scores here. For poor, we can state as 0 to 1. Developing could be 2 to 3, and superior could be 4 plus or 4, depending on the scores that we've stipulated for this. And these are descriptors. Again, this is just a sample, so I'll move on quickly because we'll be having a demonstration of framing designing the rubrics. So this is where the actual webinar presentation focus begins. Tips for developing rubrics. The first point we must remember is to align the learning objectives and the assessment. Then we frame the criteria and we make sure there are not too many of them. They're just a little between 4 and 6 or 7. and make sure that each criteria is focusing on a particular aspect of the project or the skill that is demanding on the part of the students. And we should give the descriptors and they should be measurable. Moving on to designing a rubric, these are the steps that we would follow. And I would like to demonstrate this to you using Google Docs. Throughout this presentation, I'm using Google Tools because most of us have 90% of us have Google accounts, and we use these tools quite often. So coming to the step-by-step description of and designing of the rubric, step one is to identify the learning objective and what is being assessed. This, I'm sure we all understand. Step two is we create the list of criteria. Before that, we frame a table and we start populating the table with the information that we desire. So I've added the assessment criteria first, which are vocabulary, pronunciation, grammar, and overall fluency. I'm keeping it simple for the sake of this demo. Step three is identifying the performance or quality levels or standards of assessment. So on the vertical axis, I've given the assessment criteria, and here on the horizontal axis, I've given the standards or levels of performance. I've used the terms inadequate, needs improvement, meets expectation. I wish I could use a little more simpler terms and less offensive terms. This was done in a hurry, so please understand. Then we have the scores here, 0 to 1, 1 to 2, and 3 to 4. Then we have step 4, describe each level of quality within each criterion. And we'll be adding the descriptors here. This we have for the basic level, and this we have for the higher level of expectation meeting. So first, descriptor would be uses only basic, simple vocabulary and expressions, and sometimes uses inadequate vocabulary. Since this does not really meet our requirement, we're gonna score them just a 0 or 1. And on the higher level, we have properly used vocabulary and expressions, so we'll give them a 3 or 4. So this is how we proceed. Now I've used only English related points here, and I've added the weight and the score in the last step. Weight can be the weightage that we give to these elements or criteria. So vocabulary, I've given 10%, pronunciation 20%, grammar 30%, and the overall fluency is 40%. Here is one sample for math. I'm using this because I know that some of our participants are from other departments as well, technical and non-technical. However, I cannot give all the samples, but a few I've chosen. So we have category here, weight, and then we have the levels here. So category is given here, the weight is given here, and all the other aspects are clearly stated. And one more sample for social studies. So these are just a few aspects to talk about the versatility of rubrics as we use them in our everyday assessment context. I'd also move on and go ahead and show you some a website which actually helps you create a rubric template, which you get ready-made from the website. There are many more, but I'm using only this to demonstrate. So you open this link and click on the rubric templates. What happens here is we get a lot of samples stated, and we click one and we simply download this. So this is one aspect of online.
Dr. Swati, sorry to interrupt. You are left with 3 minutes.
Ma'am, you have unmute. Please unmute yourself.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, Dr. Swati, I'm sorry to interrupt. 2 more
minutes.
minutes. Yeah, please. Yes. Thank you.
Yeah. Finally, I'm looking at Google tools to design scoring rubrics, and these are pretty interesting. I've started using this one orange slice teacher rubric. I invite the participants to try it out, experiment with this. This is a Google add-on. You can simply go to Google Doc and download this add-on called Orange Slice Teacher Rubric, and you can do the same with Google Sheets and Google Forms. The best I would say is Google Forms, because we'll be having a lot of flexibility in scoring the students. Creating a rubric is not so difficult, but scoring the students individually is quite a challenging task. So I would go for Google Forms, wherein you would receive individual grading options. So I can probably show you just one point on Google Docs. How do we create the one using orange slides? But I guess I'm running out of time, so I'll stick to this presentation for now. That's it. Please take a screenshot of this. It'll be useful for the people who would like to go on with experimenting with Google tools that we have. That's it. These are my references, and thank you so much. I'll stop my share now.
Thank you, ma'am. Meanwhile, one more short announcement. Dear participants, please ask your questions in the Q&A box only. Thank you. Dr. Siva, over to you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Dr. Swati Chikala, for such a nice presentation. And you have given such a valuable insights about rubrics and assessment tools by involving the participants actively, by giving various formats and examples. Thank you very much for your talk. Now it's time for us to have the second speaker of the webinar, Mr. Paul Armstrong. Mr. Paul Armstrong is a well-known language accent trainer. He worked in globally reputed organizations such as NIIT, IBM, Accenture, and as an accent trainer to call center executives. He also worked in reputed engineering colleges and served in positions like head of the Department of English and also vice principal of the institute. He worked in business college in Africa. Presently, he is a freelance English trainer, training the aspirants for the exams like IELTS, GRE, TOEFL. With an immense pleasure, I invite Mr. Paul Armstrong to deliver the lecture on teaching speaking skills. Over to you, Paul Armstrong.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Shiva. Thank you also, ELT Pune and Tolani Maritime Institute, and also, yes, ELT Vishakhapatnam. And today, as we continue, I'm happy that, the speaker that preceded me spoke about assessment. On the heels of assessment, I think teaching does make a lot of sense. Unless there is assessment, teaching doesn't usually happen really well. So I believe this is a good transition, and I'm thankful to Dr. Swati for her presentation too. Now, teaching speaking skills is what I'd like to speak to you about this morning. One of the things that I have always thought very important before we could even teach students is to know the student. Unless we know the student, we would not know the needs of the student, and we would not be able to do a good job on teaching, especially to these students. Now, one of the things that I do, especially when I teach students from a different language from what I speak as a mother tongue, is use this book called Learner English by Michael Swan. Now, it's a good book, and this is where you will get all the problems of interference. For example, there was this time when I had to teach students at Kerala. I didn't know how to actually go about, dealing with the problems of speech, especially to these students. So this book came in handy, and this was quite a helpful book. And you will find a lot of interference problems that the writer discusses in this book. And that's one thing, of course. But another important thing is assess your students. Always understand their level of language ability. As I was telling you, it's not easy to teach well unless we know the students, right? So understand the level of language ability. Now, one of the rubrics, of course, as Dr. Swati was speaking about, is CEFR. I do know that some of you are aware of the Common European Framework for Reference, where you're given scores from A1 through C2. Now, it's always good to grade students and put them at a particular level so you'll be able to cater to their needs, all right? So that's one more thing. The other thing that I do in my classes is also, yes, go to the extent of knowing their interests. Why should I know their interest is one question most teachers ask. Now, one of the reasons that I have understood to be which is relevant to this idea of knowing their interests, is that when we know their interests, we can actually lead them from familiar to the unfamiliar. We can actually give them topics that actually relate to their interests. And so you kind of break the ice, rather students on the other side break the ice, and then they come up with points, and then they speak about the topic or whatever is given, which is relevant to their interest. I did have a case in Kerala when one of the students wanted to actually learn English, and then I was asking him if he could tell me his interests, and his answer was basketball. So in fact, one of the first topics that I asked him to speak about was basketball. And it was very easy for him to speak about basketball because, it is his game. And he used very easily words like dribble, pass, and, words like that. But again, to know their background, to know their mother tongue and the medium of instruction from which they come from is something that I think is useful, because you can actually see how much their mother tongue is influencing their English language, right? So these are things that I do personally in my class. It's always good, again, as I was telling you, to know our students before we even further go ahead to teach the students, of course, in this case, speaking skills. Now, what must I teach? Now, when I talk about speaking skills, there are these 4 criteria. Incidentally, again, Dr. Swati wrote these criteria on her rubrics chart, and I'm really happy about it. These are the 4 things that I usually ask my students to work on. One is fluency, and the other is vocabulary, and then grammar and pronunciation. Now, when I talk about fluency, the one thing that I do usually is, yes, give them familiar topics first, but at the same time also make sure that I teach some of the things. For example, paraphrasing. Now, most of these students suffer from hesitation. There are 2 reasons why they hesitate. One being that they don't have content. They don't know anything about the subject. And so what I do is, obviously, again, start with a familiar topic and then lead them to the unfamiliar topics. But for content, maybe there are techniques that can be used. I was recently reading a research paper on philosophy and ELT. And this writer has this suggestion to make. He says, if they're not comfortable with any topic, why don't you give them philosophical topics? Like, for example, speak about the existence of God. Do you believe in the existence of good and evil, or is it just in our minds? Stuff like that maybe can be helpful in overcoming the hesitation for content. But primarily as language teachers, we know that we focus on hesitation for language. So what I ask my students to do is learn the art of paraphrasing. Paraphrase. If you can't get that right exact word, why don't you say that same thing in other words? The English is full of words. I mean, think about other words that you can use to express that same idea. Is one thing that I ask my students to do, and that really worked. Paraphrasing, that doesn't actually again affect their fluency. And then the other thing that I have done is using linking words and expressions. And I ask students, and of course before that, teach them to use linking words and expressions. Now, linking words and expressions, they actually kind of prompt students to add one more idea. For example, it can be, again, a similar idea to the previous idea, or it can be a contrastive idea to the previous idea. But anyways, they kind of prompt the students as they speak when they use the linking word or an expression to add one more idea. So that way they are fluent in a way, and I believe that worked for me as well. Now, one of the activities that I have always asked my students to work on and do in my class is jam. I think most of you are aware of what it is. Just a minute. Now, I give them a minute, and then of course the rules are in place all the time. Don't repeat, don't hesitate, don't deviate. So I would ask the other students to see if they are repeating, hesitating, deviating. And so such an activity, I think, is helpful when you're teaching with the aim of achieving fluency in students' language. Jam is one thing. Of course, there are many other things, but very often I have used jam. And if the students are good enough there, what I would do is I would extend the time to 2 minutes, and then it goes on from 2 to 3, and sometimes it's even 5 minutes in my class for presentations. So that is one of the ways that I would actually work on developing fluency in my students. And then grammar. Grammar is, again, a very important parameter. Most students would ignore and say, grammar is not important. But I would emphasize on the importance of grammar, and then I would tell them, use as many structures as possible. It is not just a few simple sentences. Why don't you go ahead, use a linking word and then make it compound or maybe even complex, right? So I would encourage students to use a range of structures, and I would want you also to do that, because that way they can be creative with their language, and also emphasize that grammar is important, right? And some teachers, yes, are prescriptive in the sense that, they only correct their language, and then they say, this is standard English. I believe we can actually give them a dose of both prescriptive and descriptive ways of dealing with grammar, and that is helpful. And again, one of the strategies that I use to particularly enhance their grammatical range and also their accuracy is this strategy called the PPF. This is a strategy that I've used for IELTS students, and they have found it useful too. Now, PPF refers to past, present, and future. So what I would do is I would ask my students to, let's say, talk about food. And then they would start speaking about food in the 3 time periods. They start with the past, and then they speak about the present, saying, they are eating pizzas and burgers and stuff like that. And then they would also speculate about the future and speak about the future. And then they say, these may be the things that they would use. I believe this strategy actually worked because they were very generous in the sense that, they were using a lot of other structures too, particularly in terms of time and tense. They were using past, present, and future. And I've realized over time that one of the problems that students struggle with is tense. And so I thought maybe this is one strategy that could actually correct their tense problems. Now that's how I do deal with grammar. And then how do I go ahead deal with vocabulary? Now, one of the assumptions I would say the students have is that, they have to learn every single word there is in the dictionary, all the dictionary entries in the dictionary. And I would always emphasize and tell my students, you have got to understand the context of the word. Unless you understand the context, there is no way you would be able to understand the meaning of the word. And I would, of course, go ahead and give examples like the word bark. Now, bark is the sound made by a dog, and of course, it's also related to trees. Or even the word chips, for example. Right? We are now talking about computer chips, not anymore. Though, of course, we are still speaking about potato chips. But still, context is what gives meaning to the words. Words in themselves are okay, but it is context I would emphasize and tell my students. So I teach my students with context on mind, especially when I deal with vocabulary. And then there is the idea of connotation too. The word, for example, let's say the word smell is a neutral word that might mean bad or good. So I would, in addition to the word smell, give other words like fragrance, for example, and also stink. I would ask my students which among, rather between these two words, stink and fragrance, is a negative word and which is positive. And of course, they do easily come up with answers, correct answers rather. So connotation is, again, a very important aspect that vocabulary teaching has to do, because unless they understand which word to use when, of course, in the context, but also whether they are negatively connotating or otherwise, they would not be able to do it well. And collocation is another important aspect that I would make sure teach my students. Now, collocation is something that most students don't do so well. So what I would suggest my students to do is learn these words together. And by the way, collocation means words that go together. Learn these words together. And then possibly, yes, you can be creative, but then make sure these words are together all the time, I would say, just like vocabulary items. Now, one of the examples that I've given my students all the time is tea. When you talk about tea, you talk about strong tea. And usually, some of the students would say the opposite is weak tea, which is okay poetically. But then I would tell them, the correct collocation is actually light tea instead of weak. So then they would understand that, yes, collocation is important. Right? So these are three things that I do, especially when I'm teaching vocabulary. And I teach vocabulary almost in every class. I start with the context, and I pre-teach some words. And of course, as they speak, I would do some correction in between and help them with collocation and connotation as well. Now, the other aspect that I would teach my students when teaching speaking skills, very importantly, is pronunciation. Now, again, the idea of pronunciation kind of tells students that they have to, put on some accent and speak. And I would tell them no, because of course it's assumed that everybody has an accent. And so I would tell them the accent in which they are speaking, the Indian accent itself is recognized all over. So don't you worry about accent is what I would tell my students. Now, when I teach pronunciation, the thing that I do is, again, I would go back to Swan, especially again, when I'm dealing with students from a different place, and then see if there are any pronunciation, any problems with individual sounds, for example. Now, one of the sounds Swan says that most Indians don't pronounce properly is the wa sound in the word wonder, the first sound in the word wonder. And so I would actually go ahead, ask them to pronounce as many words as possible during this particular sound. And then for individual sounds, one of the things that, again, I do is ask them to do tongue twisters. One of the famous tongue twisters that my students have used again and again in my classes, she sells seashells on the seashore. The sha and sa sounds put together. There are, of course, other sounds that I use in tongue twisters. And of course, I ask my students to be a bit more creative and then form their own tongue twisters so they can actually perfect their pronunciation. Now, that's one thing. And then word stress is another important thing that I would teach them in teaching pronunciation. Now,
Paul, sir.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. You're left with 3 minutes, sir.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Dr. Sachin, thank you. Word stress. When I talk about word stress, of course, there are examples that I would give them, ask them to use. Alternative, for example, is one word that I've always used because and I felt that they are, of course, able to use the word, but unable to correctly pronounce it. So I would ask them first to divide the word into syllables and then see if the stress is on the right syllable. And intonation is, again, one thing that I asked them to work on. The one technique that I've used to develop intonation was ask them to record their voice, ask them to tell a story, recording their own story, a sad story or a funny story, and see if they can actually feel the story, right? So those are things that I do in my pronunciation classes. And again, I drill these words or sounds individually. I sometimes ask my students, all of them, to stand up and do it, and sometimes a person, again, to do it all alone by himself or herself. I believe pronunciation is something that should be taught with developing in the students a neutral accent, an accent that is neutral, that is globally understood, and also moreover, they should be sensitized to the different sounds that there are in English language spoken by native speakers. And I have some useful websites here. You can also go to take a screenshot of it and then use these websites. I'm sure they're helpful. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Sachin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Paul Armstrong, sir, for your valuable lecture on teaching speaking skills. From level of understanding our students' language ability to enhancing the required skills such as fluency, accuracy, vocabulary, and pronunciation. Thank you very much. Now it's time for us to have a distinguished lecture where the most experienced teacher turned trainer, Professor Jadan Patil. Professor Jadan Patil is the president of ELT Pune chapter. He has been teaching English language and literature at several colleges and universities in India and abroad for 47 years. He retired as professor of English and head of the Department of Training and Development from English and Foreign Languages University, Hyderabad. His areas of interest are English language teaching, pragmatics, stylistics, teaching language to literature, teaching English to multilingual and multicultural groups, employability skills, motivation, classroom management, teacher development, material development, and new varieties of English. Professor Patil has to his credit 20 textbooks, 8 resource books, and 80 articles published in national and international journals. He has successfully guided 10 MPhil and 24 PhD scholars. Presently, 2 PhD scholars are working under his supervision. He has evaluated more than 50 PhD theses submitted to Indian and foreign universities. He has delivered 32 invited keynote addresses and 78 plenary talks at national and international conferences in Bangladesh, Britain, Canada, China, Dubai, Germany, and in many more countries. He has received Lifetime Membership Award from English Scholars Beyond Borders, International Group of Scholars, Outstanding Contribution Award from Rajasthan Association for Studies in English, Udaipur, Lifetime Achievement Award from North Maharashtra University Teachers Association, Maharashtra, Emeritus Professor Award from Kanya Mahavidyalaya, Jalandhar, Best Educationist Award from International Institute of Management and Education, Maharashtra Bhushan Rajashri Chhatrapati Sahu, Maharashtra State Level Award for Excellence in Education from Nasik, Maharashtra, are a few among many awards which he received. With a dear participants, with a due respect and a great privilege, I invite Professor Patel to deliver his lecture on polite language. Over to Professor Patel, sir.
Thank you very much, Raghavendra, for this introduction. I don't know whether I deserve this kind of introduction or not. But anyway, thanks a lot for this. Now, a very good morning to you, friends. I'm extremely happy to be with you this morning, and I'd like to share a few of my opinions as far as this particular topic is concerned. Now, once I was sitting under a banana tree, and the banana flower that was hanging from the tree drew my attention, caught my attention. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
So, yeah. So once I was sitting under a banana tree, and the banana flower that was hanging from the tree drew my attention, caught my attention. And I started thinking in that particular direction. I said to myself, isn't Mother Nature creative? Isn't Mother Nature innovative? Isn't Mother Nature caring? And then I said, why is it that that Mother Nature has couched or placed these baby bananas between the two layers of leaves? You know, I opened the first layer of leaves and I found some cute, fragile, easily breakable, you know, baby bananas. And I continued opening layers after layers, and I found bunches after bunches of baby bananas there. And I said, why is it that Mother Nature has placed or couched these baby bananas between two covers or two layers of leaves? There must be some purpose. And I started thinking in that particular direction. And I said to myself, oh, I know. Mother Nature wants to protect her baby bananas from heat and storm and so many other natural disasters, or from cattle and so on and so forth. So that's why Mother Nature has kept these baby bananas between layers or between covers of leaves. Shan't we be doing similar to our relationships? You know, we have relationships with our neighbors, our colleagues and students and friends and family members, and there is a crime in all these relationships. So the banana flower taught me a lesson as far as human relationships are concerned. Now, I'd like to say something about the essay called On Saying Please by A.G. Gardiner. This is what happens in that particular essay entitled On Saying Please by A.G. Gardiner. Now, there is a lift operator, there is an elevator operator, and there is a lift user. The lift user enters the lift and says to the lift operator, "Stop." Now, this lift operator gets angry. He gets flared up. Why does he get angry with this lift user? He gets angry with the lift user because the lift user doesn't say, "Stop, please." He doesn't use the word please. He just says, "Stop." And the lift operator literally lifts him and throws him out of the lift. Now, this is an example of how politeness is important in our day-to-day interactions and how politeness helps us protect our relationships that we already have in the society. You know, we are all socializing animals, and we are probably the only languaging animals. There are many animals which are socializing animals like we are, but probably humanity or mankind is the only species that specializes in language, using human language or verbal language and non-verbal language. Animals can communicate, but I don't think they use any language in the sense that we use language. So saying please is very important. The banana flowers taught me an important lesson. And the third one that I would like to cite an example is a folk tale. Once upon a time, there was a merchant, and there was a dispute between the goddess of poverty and the goddess of wealth. The goddess of poverty thought that she was more beautiful than the other goddess, and the other goddess thought that she was more beautiful than the goddess of poverty. They couldn't settle the dispute. The dispute continued for a long time, and finally they decided to approach a comity. A comity in Telugu means a merchant. The merchant was very diplomatic in his approach and in his handling of these two goddesses. He said to the goddess of poverty, "Oh, goddess of poverty, you look mesmerizing when you turn your back on me and disappear from here. And the goddess of poverty thought that she was really extremely beautiful. And she interpreted his utterance in that particular context like that. And she left the scene. And the committee, the merchant, was in a position to get rid of the goddess of poverty. He saved himself from becoming poor. Then he said to the goddess of wealth, "Oh, Lakshmi Devi, goddess of wealth, you look bewitchingly beautiful when you come close to me." And as a result, the goddess of wealth approached him, stood next to him, and he became rich. So he could save himself from becoming a poor person, and he could become a rich man, a rich person, when he praised the goddess of wealth. So what I'm talking about is the importance of politeness in our day-to-day interaction. You know, saying please is important, and being tactful is also important. The merchant is being very tactful. He doesn't want to displease the goddess of poverty. He doesn't want to displease any one of these two goddesses. And he can handle them very efficiently and effectively without hurting any one of them or either of them. Now, before I start giving you some examples of how politeness matters in our day-to-day life, I'd like to give you a brief introduction to some key expressions or key words. And the first key word is the word face. Now, what does face mean in the context of politeness principles or politeness theory? I'm going to use myself as a representative of all other people. So I have 4 types of face. I have my private face, I have my public face, I have my private image and my public image, and I have a positive face and a negative face. Now, we'll be referring to these positive face and negative face and private face and public face during our discussion over the next 10 minutes or so. So please remember that face is an important term in the context of politeness principle theory. The next term that I would like to dwell upon very briefly is functions. As all of us are aware, as all of us know, language performs 4 important functions. Language performs, informative function, expressive function, directive function, and social function. And all these functions have some role or the other to play in the context of politeness, of polite behavior. The next one, cooperation. Now, when we converse with other people around us, we either follow or observe or violate or flout certain maxims, certain principles. What are these maxims and how many of these maxims are there? Now, there are 4 maxims, and these maxims are the maxims of quantity, quality, relation, and manner. Now, what does the maximum of quantity ask us to do? The maximum of quantity asks us to give us only that much information which is required. We're not supposed to give more information than is asked for. We're not supposed to give less information than we are required or we are asked for. So when I'm conversing with Lena, for example, or I'm conversing with Rahul for that matter, now he has to observe certain principles, I have to observe certain principles. So when we converse, we're supposed to give only sufficient information, adequate information. We're not supposed to give extra information. We're not supposed to give, less information or more information. So that's the maximum of quantity. What does maximum of quality prescribe? The maximum of quality prescribes, producing evidence, producing proof for whatever we are saying, we're talking about. We are not supposed to make any statement. We're not supposed to say anything or make any proposition without producing any evidence or proof. So maximum quantity requires us to give only required information, not more and not less. Maximum quality requires us to give us or produce, produce evidence, produce proof. Then the third maxim is the maxim of relation. We need to be relevant in our contribution. But these maxims are time and again flouted by many people around us. Like, for example, let me give you an example from the movie Sholay. Basanti goes on talking and talking and talking. And at one point during her conversation with the hero, she says, "Faltu baat karne ki aadat Basanti ko to hai nahi." but she goes on talking and talking and talking. So time and again, when we travel from one place to another, or when we meet one group after another, we come across people who flout all these maxims. And the beauty lies in the flouting of the maxims more than in the observation or observance of these maxims. So the maxim of quantity is important, the maxim of quality is important, and the third maxim is the maxim of relation. Our contribution needs to be relevant, pertinent, precise, pointed. And the last maxim, the fourth maxim, is the maxim of manner. We are supposed to avoid ambiguity. Now, surprisingly enough, literature is literature. Literature is great simply because literature flouts almost all these maxims. And I remember Iago, he doesn't have any evidence. He doesn't have any proof to prove the illegitimate connection, the illegitimate relationship that she is supposed to have with Cassio. But he concocts the story, he makes up a story, and he produces the handkerchief that was given to Othello by his mother, and the same handkerchief was given by Othello to Desdemona as a symbol of fidelity, symbol of faithfulness. So Iago is probably a supreme example of flouting or a violation of these maxims, the maxim of quantity, quality, relation, and manner. And the next term that I'd like to explain very briefly is speech act. Now, every utterance that we produce is an act. Every utterance that we deliver is an act. And what are these acts that we perform when we produce utterances, when we say things? For example, we complain, we accuse people, we complain against people, we criticize people, we threaten people, we give promises, we express gratitude, and so on and so forth. So all these activities, all these utterances are acts, and these are called speech acts. Now, a speech act can be a direct act or an indirect act. Let me give you an example. Once upon a time, there was an old man. He was a diabetic, so he was not supposed to be eating sweet things. One day he went to a supermarket and brought lots and lots of chocolates, and he kept all these chocolates in the refrigerator. And after a couple of days, he went to the refrigerator to look for his chocolates. He didn't find them. And he asked his daughter, "Where are my chocolates? Where is my box of chocolates?" And the daughter said, "Well, you are a diabetic. You are not supposed to eat chocolates." So this is the direct speech act. She says what she means, and she means what she says. So you can give we can have a continuum. We can have a continuum of direct speech acts and indirect speech acts. So the daughter could have said, "You are a diabetic. I'm sorry, I won't let you eat those chocolates. I've eaten all those chocolates, or I've given those chocolates to the children in the neighborhood." That will be a direct speech act. Or she can say, "Well, I saw Rahul standing by the side of the refrigerator." Now, she is not being direct. She's not saying that Rahul finished your chocolates. She is being slightly indirect. So the first example is, "Well, you are a diabetic and I will not let you eat those chocolates." The second one is, and we are proceeding from direct to indirect on the continuum. The second one is, "Well, I saw Rahul standing by the side of the refrigerator." Or she could also say, for example, "Show me the snows of yesteryear. Can you show me the snows of last year?" No, they are not there. They melted some time ago, some months ago. So I can't show you your chocolates. Or she can say, for example, show me your diet sheet. Show me your diet sheet. And the father, as an intelligent listener, will understand the meaning and the message of this particular indirect speech act. So what I'm trying to say is something very simple. When we converse with people, we can use direct speech acts, or we can use indirect speech acts. Or we can be verbally polite or non-verbally polite. Now, when we talk about politeness principle or politeness theory, we need to keep in mind that politeness doesn't refer only to verbal interaction. It can refer to non-verbal interaction between characters, between people, and between all kinds of stakeholders here. Now, once upon a time, there was a child, and this child's grandmother, maternal grandmother, came from one culture, and his paternal grandmother was from another culture. One fine day, the maternal grandmother narrated a story to the child. And while she was narrating the story to the child, he was all the while looking at the floor. He never looked the grandmother in her eye. As soon as the story was over, the grandmother gave him a slap in the cheek and said, "Look here, my dear, in my culture, when a senior person is talking to you, you're supposed to look that person in the eye. That means you're polite. If you don't look the senior person in the eye, it means you are impolite, you are being discourteous." After a month, the boy went to the other grandmother, and one fine day, the other grandmother also narrated a story to the boy. And while she was narrating the story, the boy was staring at her, looking her in the eye constantly, continuously. And as soon as the story was over, the grandmother gave him a slap in the other cheek and said to the boy, "Look here, my boy, in my culture, when a senior person is talking to you, you're not supposed to look that senior person in the eye, in his eye or in her eye or in their eye." So what I'm saying is, when we talk about politeness, we need to consider politeness in the context of verbal interaction as well as in the context of non-verbal interaction. We also need to bear in mind the fact that what is polite in our culture may not be so in another culture. What is acceptable in our culture may not be acceptable in the other culture. So politeness is culture bound, culture specific. And I gave you the example of eye contact. Let me cite another example of non-verbal politeness or non-verbal impoliteness. You can interpret it either way. Once upon a time, there were two negotiators, business negotiators. And one negotiator was from America and the other one was from United Arab Emirates. As we know, the Arabs are physical people. They would like to touch you, they would like to hug you, they would like to experience the warmth, the bodily warmth. That's their culture. But American culture is different from the Arab culture. They believe in maintaining and protecting their own personal territory, physiological territory. So these two negotiators started their negotiation at 10 o'clock in the morning in one corner of the hall. And by lunchtime, they were found in the fourth corner of the hall. Why was it like that? The Arab negotiator wanted to be closer to the American negotiator, and the American negotiator stepped back every time the Arab negotiator stepped forward, because this man, Arab culture is predominantly physical, and that man came from America, which is an individual culture, not a collectivist culture, not a physical culture. So what I'm trying to say is something very simple, that when we talk about politeness, we need to remember certain things in mind. And I'm not going to delve deep into these things because I want to leave some time for the questions and answers.
Yeah.
So
Dr.
how much time do I
Patil,
have, Sachin?
I'm sorry to interrupt you, sir.
3 minutes.
2 minutes, last 2 minutes, 2 to 3
2 minutes. Okay, good.
Thank you.
So let me go back to the idea of the face. As I said, I have a public face, I have a private face. I have a positive face, I have a negative face. What do I mean by positive face and negative face? You know, usually people don't like listening to complaints or accusations or criticisms or advice or disagreements. Everyone is very happy when people congratulate them, praise them, pay compliments to them, appreciate their achievements, or approve whatever they have done, and so on and so forth. So most of us, in fact, all of us are very happy when people praise us, compliment us, congratulate us, say good things about us, good things of us. And we are not so very happy when people disagree with us or dislike us or give us advice or criticize us or complain about us or threaten us. And when we perform a positive politeness act, we don't have to be indirect. We can, when we praise, we can praise people directly. When we can congratulate people to protecting the negative face of the listener. We need to be extra careful and we need to be indirect in our approach, right? Now, I have a lot of other things to say, but I'm sorry, since our time is very short, very limited, and we can't cover almost all the aspects. So I need to stop here. And the things which I haven't covered in my brief talk can be covered during the question answer session. Thank you so much, Sachin. Back to you.
Thank you, sir.
Back to you, Sachin.
Yeah, sir. Thank you. Dr. Siva.
Thank you very much, Professor Jagan Patil, sir, for your valuable and vibrant lecture on polite language by giving very lively examples and stories and anecdotes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me take 2 more minutes time to summarize the 3 different lectures by 3 distinguished personalities today. When it comes to the first lecture by Dr. Swati Chikala on rubrics, useful assessment tools, which has highlighted the importance of designing
The connection is lost.
Dr. Siva, are you there?
So please unmute yourself.
Please unmute yourself and yes. Yes, sir. Dr. Siva, please continue.
Yes. Dr. Swati Chakala's presentation on rubrics, useful assessment tools, has highlighted the importance of designing rubrics step by step, and it also has explained about different types of rubrics such as holistic and analytic rubrics for various purposes. When it comes to the second talk by Mr. Paul Armstrong on teaching speaking skills, which has given the importance of understanding the level of students' language ability, from there to focus on required skills such as grammar, pronunciation, fluency, and vocabulary. Especially, his emphasis on teaching pronunciation by conducting tongue twisters, words, and training the students on words, phrase, syllabification, and also on intonation. The third lecture on polite language by Professor Jagan Patil was the masterpiece with full of stories and anecdotes, which has highlighted the importance of politeness in maintaining the relationship in society. He has given various examples, started with banana, lift operator, merchant, and he has taken us to the grandmas and grandchildren stories and yes, whatnot. He has given very good examples which made us understand the importance of using polite language in different contexts. He has explained something about the maxims of quantity, quality, relevance, and also the manner, and which has also where there are different kinds of direct and indirect speech acts. And with all, I would conclude by saying that these 3 lectures are really useful to the participants today. Thank you, Dr. Swati Chikala and Mr. Paul Armstrong and Professor Jagan Patil for your valuable time and talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you. My
Kiran, sir.
pleasure. Now we are ready to take questions.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Siva. My name is Kiran Patil. I'm one of the office bearers of ELT Pune chapter. Before we begin with our question and answer session, let me inform all the participants that the feedback link will be posted in the chat box very shortly. Please submit the feedback as it is one of the eligibility criteria to get the certificate of attendance of today's webinar. I would also like to inform all of you that you would receive your certificate in a week's time. It will be sent to you electronically on the email address that you would mention in the feedback form. So please ensure that you type your salutation, name, and email address accurately. Let us now begin with the first question that we have received from our participant. So there are lots of questions. We are just trying to see how we can get some of these questions and prioritize. The first question is for Dr. Swati. This is from Facebook, asked by Ms. Swarna Rani. Can you please throw some light on online assessment of descriptive answers? In fact, one similar question is, how do we evaluate handwriting?
Yes, yes. Yeah, that's a very interesting point to discuss, because rubrics designing and developing is one task, and actually implementing them and scoring the students, a lot of students that we have in class, scoring them individually is a Herculean task. I totally agree to what uh, is believed by many people, that it's not an easy assessment task. However, since we have the Google add-ons and a few more websites that give us templates which are ready-made, and as I mentioned earlier, of course, I just mentioned it quickly, we can use Google Sheets or Google Forms, wherein we do not have to do individual table for individual student. We can simply select the number of students that we have, upload the list onto Google Forms, and upload the rubric into the Google form, and we get the automatic data into a Google Sheet, wherein we can define the criteria according to the rubric. For instance, somebody asked about descriptive answers. We can state the criteria to be about the legibility or content, grammatical presentation, vocabulary choice. We can give this criteria if you're using analytic rubric. Otherwise, we can simply go on for holistic rubric, which does not need criteria to be defined. We can simply give the standard of performance and score it accordingly. That will be much more easier. Another one, which I did not mention it here, is impressionistic rubric. I'm sure Mr. Paul Armstrong is familiar with this. This rubric is very, very simple. This I came across, I heard this a few weeks ago in a webinar given by Malti Kumari. She's a senior British Council trainer. Yeah, I think it was really useful to understand that impressionistic rubric can also be used for things like handwriting or descriptive answers, wherein we actually do not have to frame any criteria at all. We can go on an overall impression that is created by the answer that we see, and score it, as simple as that. For handwriting, I think it's pretty okay to go with rubrics. We can probably give sizing or letter formation or line alignment, neatness, or legibility. These criteria can be stated. If you're talking about primary or secondary level school, we should probably give them scope to understand where they stand and help them improve it. So this is what I feel.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, ma'am. There is also another question from Mahin Zubairi. Rubrics are time consuming. How do we overcome this challenge and create some rubrics as quickly as possible? Is there a method? Is there a technique to do that?
Yes. Yeah, I understand. Since I had to really rush through the presentation, I really didn't have time to experiment with the rubric creation or developing here. However, the Google add-ons that I stated in my presentation, which are for the Google Docs, Google Sheet, and Google Forms in themselves, are wonderful tools, Google tools that can be used to create automatic rubrics. All we have to do is select the criteria and the standards, and the descriptors are automatically created for us. So it becomes pretty easy for us. If that is not happening right now, we can in fact download and customize rubrics from online. Again, creating rubric is not a task. Using them for grading is a task. So that also is possible when we use Google Forms and Google Sheets, wherein the scoring is easy and we can send customized mails to students once the grading is completed.
Okay, thank you. Ma'am, one more question from Facebook. Srinivasa Rao has asked how to assess primary school rural area students using rubrics. Could you please give an example?
If you, sir, if we have to talk about rubrics for primary school level students, especially the rural background, again, depending on the level of the learners, how you understand that, we can use the same rubric formats and probably alter the criteria, make them a little more relevant to that particular context. However, the framing the rubric remains the same, if at all we want to use the rubric. So that's how it is.
Okay, all right. Let me move ahead. There are a few more questions, but let me move ahead to the second speaker, Mr. Paul Armstrong. There is a question from Sri. As a teacher from Middle East, she is from Middle East, I have problems in teaching pronunciation. I usually give tongue twisters too. Is there a better way to drill problematic phonemes like P, B, F, and V?
All right. I think that's a good question. I think Arabic speakers do not have the sound pa, the first sound that you made. They instead use a b sound. That's a voiced sound. Now, I think one of the things that you could do is maybe follow the exercises of Cicely Berry. Have you ever heard about Cicely Berry? She's a voice coach for Shakespearean drama. She's a very popular figure as a voice coach. And I believe Cicely Berry's series is one series that I'd like to suggest the teacher. And I think that's a very relevant question coming from Middle East.
Can I say one thing?
Please.
Paul, with your permission?
Please, go ahead, sir.
Do you think it would be a good idea for us as teachers of English or any language for that matter,
right,
to give the students an exercise on minimal pairs like pair, bear, pair, bear?
Thank you.
Parking, barking, parking, barking.
Yeah. Thank
Maybe
you.
That will help them to some extent. Yeah.
That's beautiful, sir, Professor. Thank you very much. That's one thing that I have done with my students as well. Minimal pairs is one beautiful exercise. But yes, Cicely Berry has got some exercises like that as well. So maybe you could refer to Cicely Berry on Google and you have a lot of exercises of Cicely Berry. Thank you, sir, Professor Patil.
Welcome.
Yeah, even there is another question which is more generic. How to teach our students to overcome mother tongue influence?
Okay.
So who is that question for? For Paul, I suppose.
Yeah, yes.
Okay.
That's from Miss Malika.
Okay, Miss Malika, thank you. I think that's a question that we have all asked ourselves, especially as teachers. Definitely, it's hard to easily see them transition from the language that they are speaking to the language that we expect them to speak. But since again, we are exposed to a lot of media, YouTube, for example, a lot of videos and audio visuals, I believe imitation is one thing that can help, especially in terms of intonation. I want in fact, that's what exactly I tell my students, catch their intonation. I would not ask my students to focus on accent, rather, what are they intoning on? What are they stressing on? I think imitating their intonation, I think somehow helps them work on overcoming their mother tongue influence.
Yeah, in fact, there is a question which is related to intonation as well. In fact, that is from Dharmendra said to Professor Z.N. Patil. What role does intonation play in English speech in terms of politeness? How is it related to politeness? Intonation.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dharmendra ji, for that huge question. I'll try to answer it in my own way, humble way. Now, yes, intonation does play a very crucial, very significant role in polite behavior or impolite behavior. I'll give you a simple example. suppose I'm going to stay in Surat for a month, from the first day of the month to the last day of the month, from 1st to 31st. And you invite me to your place. You want to entertain me. You want to introduce me to your family members. So on the first day of the month, you just received your salary for the previous month. And on the first day of the month, you invite me to your house or place or residence. And I say to you, Dharmendra ji, I'd like to have a cold drink. I'd like to have a cold drink. And you say, you would? You would? So rising tone is usually warm and friendly and sympathetic and offering and hospitable. So since it is my first visit to your house, you would like to use the rising tone because you haven't extended your hospitality to me for a month. So you say, you would? Now I keep visiting your place every day, and every evening I say to you, I'd like to have a cold drink. Now what will happen over a month is your friendly, warm, hospitable, offering, tone will turn into a frozen tone. And on the 31st of the month, if I say the same thing to you, Dharmendra ji, I'd like to have a cold drink, you will say, you would. So you would use the falling tone. And as an intelligent listener, I would like to interpret your falling tone like this. Now, Dharmendra ji wants to say many things. For example, he wants to say, Professor Patil, who made you a professor? And who says that you have been teaching English for so many years, right? You are an experienced person. I've spent all my salary for the month on your hospitality, on your cold drink, and you keep visiting me and you keep asking for the cold drink. You want to say all these things, but you don't say these things because you are a very polite person and you want to continue and strengthen and consolidate the friendship that we have enjoyed for so many years. So on the first day, you would say, for example, in response to my demand or my request for a cold drink, I say, I'd like to have a cold drink. And you would say, you would? Warm tone. And the 31st, I say, I'd like to have a cold drink. And you say, you would. पता है, कहने की जरूरत नहीं है, पता है. So rising tone on the first day of the month and falling tone on the last day of the month, friendly tone on the first day and frozen tone on the last day. This is the role that is played by intonation in our everyday life, and this is one of the politeness strategies. If I say, Dharmendra ji, are you sick of my visits? And you can say, did I say that? I didn't say anything like that. So you have some route to escape. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The next question is also for Professor Patil. How to strike a balance between two opposite cultures having almost contrary polite maxims or notions?
Okay. When we talk about cultures, we need to be very careful because it's very difficult to understand even our own culture. I haven't understood our culture fully. Maybe I have just scratched the surface of our culture and I have not explored so many other facets or aspects of our culture. So one has to be very cautious when one talks about cultures. And I don't think there are any cultures which are diametrically opposite. No. Maybe there are a few differences between these two cultures. Like, for example, when I went to Britain as a British Council scholar way back in 1991, the British Council office in Mumbai called me for a briefing. And they said, Professor Patil, please understand there will be some differences between your culture here and our culture there. So be careful. What is acceptable here may not be so there, and what is unacceptable there may not be unacceptable here. So it all depends on the culture. As I gave you the example of the eye contact between the grandchild and the grandmother, there may be differences, but I don't think there are any cultures which are completely diametrically opposite. But before we visit a foreign culture, before we uproot ourselves from our culture and accept a foreign assignment and start getting ready to be there for 3, 4, 5 years, we need to familiarize ourselves with that culture. Otherwise, we'll get culture shocks after culture shocks. Thank you.
Okay. One more question. There are many, in fact, but one more question is for Mr. Paul. How to motivate the students who are from rural background, because they have lack of communication skills and they hesitate and they have a problem of hesitation. How do we help them overcome these kinds of problems?
Okay. I think we should thank YouTube and also all the social media websites, because I think without any bar between rural and I believe urban, everybody has access to these channels. And that is one reason why I told ask students' interests. What are their interests? And if you know their interests, probably they're tapping into YouTube for particular interest groups, and then they're accessing material from those channels. And they're exposed to language, that's my point. And if they're exposed to language, I believe they can. As they chat, for example, they do use some English. I mean, it is said that we can't completely speak in our mother tongues these days, because English has almost become part of our mother tongue as well. So I believe definitely there is this challenge of motivating rural students, but since they're exposed to language somehow by social media, I think it makes it a bit more easier for us to motivate them. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Okay, maybe we'll have this as a last question because we have limited time. This is from Gunasetti. From a functional, this is for Professor Patil. From a functional point of view, certain expressions are localized. How do we fill the gap in functional communication, especially for those who come from rural background and lack knowledge related to socio-economic and cultural conditions?
Right. Honestly speaking, I didn't get the point that this gentleman is making in the question, but I'll try to answer. I'll see whether I have understood the question properly or not. Now, there are varieties and varieties of English all over the world, and each variety has its own norms, its own functions. Now, you refer to, or you mentioned to the functional aspect of English. Like in our variety, in some parts of our country, especially in the northern part of India, people still use some sort of bookish English, for example, and their English is, their English has lots of examples of transfer from the mother tongue to the other tongue, to English. For example, what's your good name? Now, suppose you are conversing, let's say there are some foreigners from Britain, from America, from Australia, and there is a large group of people, and the group consists of Americans, British people, Australians, Indians, Japanese, and so on and so forth. And somebody from India says, may I know your good name, please? Now, the person coming from America or Britain or Australia will be shocked, because there is nothing like a good name or a bad name in their country, in their variety of English. In our variety, we try to use or transfer certain expressions from our languages to the other language, to the target language, English. So I can cite lots and lots of other examples. Some people can say, well, I'm a very small radish from an unknown garden. And when you read novels by Khushwant Singh and Mulkraj Anand and Rajarao, you will come across several examples of such transfers from mother tongues to the other tongue, to the target language, that is English in this case. So I'm a small radish from an unknown garden. मैं किस झाड़ की पत्ती हूँ, किस खेत की मूली हूँ. So these are transfers, right? So when you interact with people from other countries, you need to be very careful, and you need some sort of briefing before you go abroad to some other country.
In fact, there is also another question, maybe last one, because I see this question appearing in the chat box many times. This is from Mahin Zubairi again. This is for Professor Patil. There is a phrase that is used: if you have no money, be polite. That shows importance of being polite, or importance of politeness. But do you think the words we choose to communicate are also important? in maintaining a polite relationship?
Yeah, in fact, I forgot to, because our time was very short, I couldn't talk about so many other aspects which I had on my piece of paper here by my side. Yes, what is polite in the context of one sort of relationship, what is polite on one occasion in one situation may be impolite in another situation. For example, suppose I come back home and I say to my wife in Hindi, "Aap mujhe," I don't know whether you understand Hindi, "Aap mujhe aapke karkamlon se jalpan karayenge." So what I'm saying is, my relationship with my wife is so intimate that I don't require this. I'm not supposed to use this kind of prolix and formal English or formal Hindi. So it all depends. The words may be polite, but the sense may be impolite. Suppose I say to my chauffeur, my personal driver, I don't have any personal driver, I don't have a car, but I just imagine that I have a car and I have a chauffeur, and I say to the chauffeur, "Excuse me, would you mind, taking me to the railway station this evening?" The chauffeur, the driver will interpret my very formal, very polite, utterance as an expression of anger. He will conclude that I am angry with him because I am not required to use so prolix and so formal language with him. He is my subordinate. He is my chauffeur. He is my driver. So it all depends on the kind of relationship that we have with people, and it all depends on the sort of occasion, whether the occasion is formal or informal, whether the relationship is formal or informal, and so on and so forth. It's a very complex phenomenon, A whole gamut of factors, a whole spectrum of elements are involved in this. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you so much. I believe we still have so many questions which are unanswered, although it's 12:41, and we still have 252 attendees. And I tend to go on with the question answer session for a while, if everybody is okay with that.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. So let me ask the next question. It is asked by one of the attendees. The name is anonymous. What is the difference between, this is especially for, I think this is directed to Mr. Paul. Okay. What is the difference between connotation and denotation?
Connotation has to do with the definition of it, and rather denotation rather.
Yes.
Yeah, and connotation has got the other shades of meaning. For example, the example that I was talking about, smell, fragrance, and stink. The difference between fragrance and stink is connotation. Of course, they refer to smell anyways, right? So I think that is the idea behind these two words.
Okay.
Can I just add a point, Paul?
Sure, please, sir.
Yeah. Now, let me give you a simple example. We have the word cow, C-O-W, cow. Now, when somebody uses the word cow while talking to a Westerner who likes eating beef, who relishes, beef, there will be one meaning for that particular person, right? Cow for an Englishman has one meaning, and cow for me as Indian has another meaning. For me, cow, the moment I hear the word cow, lots of associated meanings, lots of connotative meanings are, they surface, right? So it all depends on the culture, the content, the context, the context, the relationship, the occasion, the situation, and a whole lot of other factors. Thank you. Thank you, Paul.
One more question. This question is for Dr. Swati. Are rubrics framed as per students' mental level or content oriented? How do we decide? Uzali has asked this.
Yes, thank you for the question. Rubrics are framed based on the level. The criteria is chosen based on the level of the students. That is understood, because if I'm framing a rubric for a 5th standard student, I would analyze the level at which the student could be and then frame my rubric according to that. However, I'd be testing not the level of the students exactly, but also the content. So it's both, I would say. However, the criteria would be framed based on the level first. Yes.
Okay, thank you. There is another question from Jashobanta Nayak. I think it's open for anybody to answer. How do you encourage students to use range of structures who lack basic grammar? Now, the students who lack basic grammar, how do you encourage them to use range of structures? Maybe Professor Patil can answer, or Mr. Paul.
Okay, let me try. Paul can also try. Swati can also try. So that's a good question. I'd like to take you to a story, and the story is entitled Unicorn in the Garden. It's a story about a couple, and the man and the woman are not very happy with each other. In fact, the man is waiting for an opportunity to get rid of the woman, and vice versa. Now, in this story, there is a sentence. You know, at one point in the story, the wife, calls the police and the psychiatrist, and she asks them to come to her house as early as possible and bring a straight jacket. A straight jacket is a jacket meant for a crazy person, a mad person, a lunatic. So the sentence is like this. She telephoned the police and she telephoned a psychiatrist. So in my class, what I would like to do, how I would like to use this sentence is like this. For example, she telephoned the police and she telephoned the psychiatrist. I would ask them little questions, step-by-step questions. Okay, tell me what sort of sentence, what kind of sentence is it? Is it a complex sentence or a compound sentence? Can you break the sentence into two parts? And I'm sure some learner in the class would like to try. And I'm sure somebody will come up with the answer. Yes, sir, this sentence has two parts to it. For example, she telephoned the police can be an independent sentence, and she telephoned the psychiatrist can be another independent sentence. But the author has put these two independent autonomous sentences into one sentence. He has collapsed the two sentences into one sentence. And what the author has done is he has used the connecting word, the conjuncting word, and. So it's a compound sentence. Okay. Now, can you say the same thing using other structures? And I'm sure, and this has happened in my class several times, and I'm sure somebody in your class will also come up with, or some boys and girls in your class will also come up with appropriate responses. For example, she telephoned not only the police, but also a psychiatrist. I'm speaking from experience, and these responses were elicited by me in my classrooms. Right? These responses came from my students in my classroom, where I use this particular story. So the original sentence is she telephoned the police and she telephoned a psychiatrist. The two sentences have been collapsed into one sentence with the help of the connecting word and. So it's a compound sentence. Now I ask my students, give me other structures to express the same meaning. And somebody will say, she telephoned not only the police, but also a psychiatrist. And someone else will say, she telephoned both the police and the psychiatrist, or she telephoned the police and a psychiatrist both. She telephoned the police as well as the psychiatrist. She telephoned the police and the psychiatrist too. She telephoned the police and the psychiatrist as well. So as well, also to not only, but also so many other patterns or structures, slightly different structures can be practiced or presented or elicited from our students in the classroom, our learners in the classroom. So there are ways and ways of handling such matters in the classroom, and it all comes with experience and thinking on the part of the teacher. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, we've been receiving many more questions and actually very positive feedback as well in the chat box and on Facebook as well. But again, now since we have limited time, I will take this as a last question And maybe we can have a separate session or a 2-hour webinar where we actually focus on just answering the questions which are unanswered here, right? So let me ask this as a last question. This is actually again a generic question, although it is asked by Mr. Amir, and it is for Professor Patil. Kindly suggest ways to improve English in government schools of India.
Improve English?
English in government schools.
Uh-huh.
In India.
All right. Now, I think that's a good question and a very practical, very pragmatic, very frequently asked question. I hear this question time and again. It crops up at every seminar, every conference, every webinar, and so on and so forth. Now, there is no magic wand. There is no magic stick or wand. We can't just use a wand to improve conditions overnight. A lot of things have to go into the process. For example, teacher training is very important. And quite often what happens in rural schools and colleges is that the teachers themselves are not competent enough. I'm not blaming them. Maybe the circumstances have made them like that. Maybe they are not very well paid. Maybe they work on clock hour basis. Maybe they don't have access to good library. Maybe they don't have any training programs which they can attend. So in my opinion, one very good strategy would be to conduct as many workshops for teachers as possible. And we can also have, activity-based seminars or workshops. Workshops are always activity-based. So we can have activity-based sessions for learners as well. Installing a library, a small library in the school, in the college is one way. Asking them to listen to some good channels, television channels like BBC or CNN would be another strategy. Updating the knowledge of the teacher who teaches English, or honing the skills of the teachers who are teaching there. And so many other things can be done in order to improve the standard, the quality of English that is being taught or that is taught at rural schools in India. Again, what strategy? The strategy that works in one school may not work in another school. It all depends on so many other factors. Thank you. Maybe Paul and Swati would like to say something in addition?
No.
No, sir. I think you said giving a very well described answer. So yes.
All right. Okay, then this brings us to the concluding part of our presentation, the webinar. Now, on behalf of the office bearers of ELT Visakhapatnam chapter and ELT Pune chapter, it is my immense pleasure and privilege to propose a vote of thanks. I would also like to take this opportunity to acknowledge and appreciate the efforts of all those who have directly or indirectly contributed to the success of today's webinar. I must thank today's speakers, Dr. Swati Chikala, Mr. Paul Armstrong, and Professor Z.N. Patil for delivering 3 very valuable and insightful webinars or lectures. We thank the principal of Tolani Maritime Institute for his support and encouragement. Last but not the least, we thank all the members of ELT Visakhapatnam chapter, ELT Pune chapter, and all the other participants for their active contribution. And we have received actually overwhelming response, more than 900 registrations, and I believe many of them are on Facebook as well. So thank you so much for your active contribution, participation. With this, I declare today's program to be over. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.